Joining me today to deliver the 2021-2022 third quarter finances. From the very beginning, our government has been transparent and accountable to Ontario taxpayers by providing regular updates on the province's finances. Even through the uncertainty of the pandemic, our government has never wavered in this commitment. After all, regular quarterly updates are an important part of governance in the private sector, and that standard should be no different in the public sector. Today's report provides an update on Ontario's economic and fiscal outlook for the fiscal year, in addition to critical investments we have made to support the fight against the Omicron variant.
The present report gives an update on the financial, economic, and fiscal outlook for Ontario, as well as investments that we did in the fight against the Omicron variant.
Of the pandemic, we have made incredible progress in fighting COVID-19 through record investments to protect Ontario's people, our progress, and our economy. We have made over $2 billion in new investments since the fall economic statement. We've provided $1.3 billion in additional support for the healthcare sector during the COVID-19 pandemic, including expenses such as personal protective equipment, additional staff, and infection prevention and control measures. As well, we've funded the support and rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines. And we've provided additional supports for small businesses and workers impacted by the necessary public health restrictions, including the Ontario Business Costs Rebate Program and the $10,000 Ontario Small Business Grant COVID-19 Relief Fund. Our government is now projecting an improved deficit of $13.1 billion for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. This is $8.4 billion lower than projected in Build Ontario in the fall economic statement. This is primarily due to the increased revenue forecast, largely attributed to stronger than expected economic growth in 2021 and higher net tax assessments for prior years. Ontario is getting stronger, but economic uncertainty remains. Our government recognizes that while we have made important progress, we have more work to do. The economy
of Ontario is stronger, but there's still uncertainty. Our government recognizes, even though we made progress, we have a lot to do still.
Supply chain challenges, international political instability, and rising cost of living continues to make forecasting a challenge. But we have laid a strong fiscal foundation on which our government will continue to build Ontario, with a plan for recovery that invests in new highways and hospitals, a plan that supports workers, growth, and job creation, and measures to put more money into the pockets of families and seniors. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We'll now go to the phone line for questions. It's one question and one follow-up.
A reminder to press star one if you have questions. First will be Alison Jones at the Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to a gap in revenue projections that the FAO laid out. The FAO said that may be due to some unannounced tax cuts, and I'm wondering if your government is still planning on keeping the 2018 promise to deliver some income tax cuts.
Well, thanks for the question, Alison, and I don't think you'd be shocked or surprised. I'm not going to disclose what we're thinking about anything that may or may not be in the budget or any tax cuts. But I will say this, I thank the Financial Accountability Officer, as I always do, for the important work that they do. But I'd also remind everyone their forecasts always come at a point in time that often differs from the point in time than when we put our forecast together. So his update was February 2nd. Of course, our last fiscal update was November 4th. So, of course, before the fiscal update, there was no Omicron. We didn't see the future. If anyone had that crystal ball and saw that future, I'd like to hire them for my team. So their revenue projections, their projections going forward differ clearly 3 months after we put our projections out. And the revenues have been stronger. At the same time, in January, across this country, we saw 200,000 jobs lost. So there's still a lot of uncertainty in the markets, uncertainty with the health environment. Today was a big step forward this morning that the Premier announced based on the Chief Medical Officer's advice and recommendation, a reopening of the economy. And, you know, our plan that we tabled in the Fall Economic Statement in November really was our vision to build Ontario, to build, as I said, highways and hospitals and health care for long-term care, broadband, housing, and also a plan for supporting labor and working for workers and ultimately affordability. So, and factors that go into putting more money into the pockets of the people of Ontario. So, Alison, I'll have a lot more to say when we table the budget.
Follow up, Alison?
Yeah, I would take a budget date if you want to give that to us now also. But on the subject of tax cuts, I know you said you're not going to kind of jump the gun on what's going to be in the budget, but I wanted to ask about gas tax because it's something the Premier has promised that we would see before the budget, the cut to the provincial fuel tax. And I think a lot of drivers are probably wondering if and when that's still coming, given the record prices at the pumps that we're seeing.
Well, first off, definitely there are certain categories like groceries, and we've seen the impacts of inflation, particularly those on lower income and higher seniors with fixed incomes and across the board. Look, we're always looking at ways to make lives a little bit easier for those who are impacted in their pocketbooks, and that's why I constantly am reviewing with the Premier a range of options that we can look at to be able to put more money in the pockets of the people of Ontario, particularly those that I just mentioned, and we'll continue to look at those. So, of course, this is the Q3 fiscal update, and what's so important about this update, I've been up here every 90 days or so updating the people of Ontario on the numbers, and I'll continue to do that. I think it's an important practice of standing up here every quarter and even right through COVID, telling people how we're spending taxpayer money, how we're investing in our healthcare system, protecting that investment in healthcare, and having an eye for the future, because you know we really have to continue the path forward to build Ontario, to make it a more prosperous Ontario. So all that will be in the mix, and you're right, I'm not going to disclose the date of the budget today, but I will tell the people of Ontario that we're working around the clock to look at all the options and tools that we have to move this province forward.
Next question.
From Patrick Bethel at Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Minister. I'm wondering what sectors are driving the increases in corporate tax revenues?
Well, thanks for the question, Patrick. I would say, you know, it's broad-based, and of course, you know, some segments of the economy have done all right. You know, we've seen employment levels now come back to where they were pre-pandemic, so that's been a positive sign. And one thing that really tells me is that Ontario has a very resilient economy, and I know it's been uneven in terms of the COVID has been on the prospects of businesses, and many have had challenges. That's why we've been there, Patrick, as you know, for small businesses that who've been impacted by the healthcare restrictions. That's why today in the Q3 document we've outlined the supports that we put in place for small businesses, the electricity and property tax rebate program, the small business grant, deferring some $7.5 billion of taxes for small businesses for 6 months, if they so choose. And you know, so our corporate tax rates, it varies. It's right across the piece. It's not one particular industry, and we'll continue to look at ways that we can support the business environment in Ontario, good paying jobs, and continue to grow this economy.
Follow up, Patrick?
Would you view that as sort of a one-time phenomenon or something that's more sustainable, the kind of revenues that you're seeing from the...
Well, our forecast is for GDP to continue to be strong throughout the year, and we'll continue to revise those forecasts based on private sector inputs. But, I have a lot of optimism and confidence in the economy. Yes, we have uncertain times. We have geopolitical factors such as in Ukraine. We have inflation. We have the job losses that I mentioned. We've got the borders. We've got a lot of things going on at the same time. But one thing that I think has been constant throughout the pandemic and even before the pandemic is, the resilience of our economy, the resilience of our workers in this province, the resilience of our healthcare workers, which all feeds into a stronger economy. And I'm confident and optimistic about the economy. So I'm looking forward to continuing to put in place, continue the vision of our fall economic statement to build, continue building this province on so many levels, to continue to make the types of investments that allow this province to prosper by getting shovels in the ground today for tomorrow. And you've seen us time and time again make those investments, and we'll continue to do so.
Next question.
From David George Kosh at BNN Bloomberg.
Hi, Minister. I'm just wondering if these estimates that you've released today include any sort of economic impact that we've seen over the past several weeks in Ottawa and Windsor with the protests and the blockades. There's been a lot of chatter about how much jobs and wages have been impacted by the blockade. So I'm just wondering if these numbers include any of those sort of economic impacts on, say, taxation or any other sort of metric here.
Oh, that's a really good question, and thank you for that question. These numbers are really reflect our third quarter, which ended December 31st, but also include our COVID spending up until February 2nd. So it does not really reflect what's going on at our borders, what's going on in Ottawa. Obviously they could have an impact. Many of those, I think a lot about those families and those workers who can't go to work because supply chains have been shut down, or, can't earn a living because of the impacts of some of the effects that we're seeing at our borders. I'm very pleased to see that the Windsor Ambassador Bridge is reopened, and these are the types of things that just show how resilient Ontario is, how resilient Canada is, and I believe strongly in the cross-border trade relationship with the U.S. We have well over 250, probably 300 years plus of cross-border trade, certainly as long as Canada's been around and the U.S. has been around, and a number of days are not going to change that relationship. And we'll monitor very closely the impacts. But as you said, the bottom line is reopening this economy safely. That's what the Premier announced this morning based on the Chief Medical Officer's advice and recommendations and the science that's underpinning that. So I'm very encouraged and optimistic about moving forward.
Follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I'm just wondering if you have any sort of guidance or further outlook on the fiscal 2022-23 deficit. And in the fall economic statement, it was projected to be a deficit of about $19.6 billion. But I'm guessing, given the deficit improvement now, that number has changed. Do you have any sort of can you provide any sort of specifics on where you see the deficit going in fiscal 22 or 23?
Well, it won't come as a surprise that I can't and won't at this stage, but of course our budget will be coming, and at that point I'll be able to update the people of Ontario and yourself and many others how the fiscal situation is impacting our books going forward, as well as our deficits longer term, our path to balance, and our economic forecast. What I can tell you is that through our fall economic statement, we had an eye on not only protecting our healthcare investments, which we continue to do. You saw today in these numbers that we put another $1.3 billion in to fund additionally our healthcare system. But we've got an eye on economic recovery. We've got an eye on economic prosperity, and that has to include all sectors of the economy. It has to include the significant infrastructure that we're investing in, which is really productive assets, not only for today but for tomorrow, and has to include the supports for our workers and for focus on the labor side. There's no secret that our labor has been impacted significantly through the pandemic, so we'll be very focused on that. And of course, as I mentioned before, trying to put more money in the pockets of the people of Ontario as we go forward.
We'll take the next question, and this will be the last question.
From Antonella Artuso, Toronto Sun.
Hello, Minister. I wanted to ask you about the FAO report. They said that the federal government put so much money into both individuals and businesses in Ontario, as well as into your government, that the bottom line was much improved, much better than it would have otherwise been. So do you expect the economy to be able to pick up that slack?
Well, I do, and I do think the private sector forecasters believe that to be the case. The private sector forecasts have improved ever so slightly since we did the fall economic statement. However, we're still in a very uncertain time because, Omicron, when I did the fall economic statement, Antonella, at that point, Omicron, no one knew the extent of Omicron and how much it would impact our economy. I think that will still be that's still unknown because that's January. We're in February right now. But longer term, I think that the private sector is positive. We do have interest rates rising. We do have a number of factors that we have to keep our eye on. But I have confidence not only in the economy here in Ontario, but I have confidence in the people of Ontario, and I have throughout our ability to adapt, our ability to have resilience and grit through this pandemic. And so I think we're going to come out positive, and I think we will see an economy that will continue to grow along the lines that the private sector is forecasting.
Follow up?
Thank you. I wanted to ask, though, about that confidence. Many small businesses have indicated that they are, in fact, carrying a large amount of debt, and that that was due in part to your government's decision to lock them down, many of them for as long as they were locked down. They now are emerging with inflation, higher labor costs, higher food costs if they're a restaurant, higher gasoline costs. So I'm wondering about that confidence, why you feel so strongly that the economy will come back when there's a lot of pessimism among especially small businesses.
Yeah, well, thanks. A very important point, Antonella. I've got a lot of small businesses in my riding in Pickering, Uxbridge that I've seen through the pandemic. Seen them crisscross this province. I've done my budget consultations, so I've seen the impact. The supports that we've put in place have helped them move through the pandemic, whether it's some of the supports we had in place beforehand, lower business taxes, lower property taxes, lower energy costs, and so forth. And then throughout the pandemic, over $6 billion in supports for small business, over $10 billion for businesses. And I guess what gives me a cause for optimism is the fact that, I think every single Ontarian, has felt the impact of the pandemic. And I think people want to, as the Chief Medical Officer has said, factor in Omicron and the current state of the virus in their lives and get on with their lives. I've seen a little bit of optimism from those small businesses accepting customers back, the 50% opening. Now we've accelerated the 100% opening. So I think that there's a sense that we're getting through this, that we've gone through a lot together, and people want to support their small businesses and local businesses. And I really want to give a big shout out to all the people of Ontario. And you know who I'm talking about, people who've supported their local retailer, supported their local jeweler, supported their local theater, supported their local restaurant, in their time of need. And we'll just continue to, I think, as Ontarians and as a government, continue to work together to come out of this pandemic and make everyone stronger.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, everyone, and stay safe.